really exceeded a lot of expectations this year. A Pacific title, and then getting it into the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But you know what? They got a bright future ahead of them. I'm excited to see exactly because not only is it just in Vancouver, but for the entire region of Canada is all up on the line. And we know Edmonton, they got a chance to do it, but I'm excited about the future of this team. Trevor Beggs, Locked on Canucks, coming up here on the show. So I got to say, man, what a year it has been for the Vancouver Canucks, and it had been a long time rolling. And I just feel like this group, from top to bottom, I mean, you name it, Brock Besser to Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, this was bound for it to eventually click. And they really have achieved they got a Pacific title, and now like they've gotten into the second round. But there are some exciting things from it. Reviewing and recapping, how did you think about this season for the Canucks?
Jake the Snake, buddy, it's a pleasure to be on with you, man. And, you know, for this season with the Vancouver Canucks, it's about damn time, okay? It's about damn time this team had some success, okay? I've talked about it before, but this is probably the most cursed franchise in the NHL. Even more so cursed than the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, you know, we're talking 54 years, no Stanley Cup. Look, me and Kyle, my co-host of Locked On Canucks, are crying because the Florida Panthers are 1 win away from the Stanley Cup Finals. How can the Florida Panthers, you know, go to 3 finals at the same amount that the Canucks have been to in their entire 54-year history? It's crazy, man. But anyways, this season, again, it definitely exceeded my expectations. I think, you know, if it didn't exceed everyone's expectations, I think, you know, anyone who thinks that is crazy. You know, the Vancouver Canucks, I did see them as a playoff team. I saw them as a wild card team. I thought, you know, LA, Vegas, and Edmonton were clearly the 3 best teams in the West. And, you know, Jim Rutherford, our president, had a quote at the beginning of the season. He said, if everything goes right, the Canucks are a playoff team. Well, pretty much everything did go right, and the Canucks were one of the best teams in the NHL. And you mentioned the big names, right? Brock Besser. You know, we were trying to trade this guy out of town for the most part a year ago, right? I was in the locker room when he was going to be healthy scratched, and he ended up going in last minute because the guy was sick. You know, he's come a long, long ways, and the guy's been through so much. Quinn Hughes, I mean, I think he's finally getting some respect. I don't know, the East Coast of North America. I don't know how much they know about this guy. They probably just thought he was a slick offensive defenseman, but man, oh man, is he such a good all-around defenseman, and, you know, deservedly the best defenseman in the league this season. And Elias Pettersson, you know what? He tailed off a bit, but 89 points, you know, one of the top scorers in the NHL. And I think this postseason was a good learning lesson for him. I think he's going to be better in the years to come in the playoffs. And we haven't even mentioned probably the best guy on the Canucks this season. You know, Quinn Hughes might have something to say about that, but JT Miller, just an absolute beauty, an absolute beast out there. This guy 5 years ago was a second line left winger, and now he's a 100-point first line shutdown centerman, bangs bodies. He does it all. The Canucks are exciting again. The Canucks are sexy again, and I'm here for it, man.
Yeah, and I tell you, because I talked about this from previewing of last year, and myself, I've been a long time, you know, Vegas native since 28 years, and now I live comfortably in Denver. I'm in Avs territory, unfortunately, but you know what? I still rep my roots. But the thing is, I talked about it when it came to the coaching hires and the fits, because last year we had Bruce Cassidy, we had Paul Maurice, and we had Pete DeBoer. Every one of them, they fit their identity. Bruce Cassidy was a kind that he pushed a lot of his youngsters and yet was able to get the best out of the veterans. Paul Maurice, you come in from an experience where you had an elite goaltender in Connor Hellebuyck, then you get Sergei Bobrovsky, and yet they figured out a lot of their offensive needs that I felt like they needed last season. That was what was going to help them to get over the top. And then there's Pete DeBoer, defensive mentality. And in a better place like Dallas, Texas, where it's all defense from there, and they go and get Chris Tanev, they're stopping shots, they're sacrificing their bodies, and then Jake Ottinger's playing out of his mind. So when I look at Rick Tocchet, and when I start looking at the quick pace, you know what they feel like to me? They felt a lot like the Indiana Pacers, because they are transitioning very quickly. They're passing very efficiently. Then I'd anticipated, because I thought Carolina was mostly the team that did that well, but they did so many things right that I just am like, Rick Tocchet really blew it out of the ballpark this year. Your thoughts on just the coach's season?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'll bring up another joke that we kept throwing out on the Lockdown Canucks podcast. We kept saying last year the Canucks chose Rick Tocchet over Connor Bedard. Now, obviously, that's a bit tongue in cheek, right? But back in January of last year when they canned Bruce Boudreau, most fans in this market, myself included, are saying, "Why are you making this change now? Why don't you just ride out the season, get the worst lottery pick possible, and try to land a potentially generational player?" The Canucks said F you to the fans, hired Rick Tocchet anyways, and it ended up being, one of the best decisions this franchise has made over the last couple of years. Fans in Vancouver know this has been a team that for pretty much a decade straight have failed to play good defensive hockey. And that is the number one thing that Rick Tocchet has done with the Vancouver Canucks. We saw in the postseason, they don't mind allowing some shots, but they really do an amazing job of not allowing the high danger chances, not allowing the shots from like that home plate area in the middle of the ice. Man, oh man, you look at some of the guys in this defense, like Tyler Myers is a great example. Big 6'8", very noticeable out there because he's a big dude, but he was brutal in Vancouver for most of his tenure. And man, oh man, this coaching staff, that might be one of the biggest miracles on the team, that they turned Tyler Myers from this chaotic train wreck into actually a respectable defenseman this year. But that's the main thing in Vancouver. I think the forwards know how to defend better. The defense certainly does a better job of, closing out that home plate area in the ice. And I think he just has guys motivated and playing for each other. I think Rick Tocchet, I mentioned JT Miller as well. I think Rick Tocchet was so good for JT Miller in his game. And, I think Rick Tocchet could probably see some of himself in JT Miller, right? A guy who's just not afraid of the dirty areas, who's got some offensive skill, who bangs bodies, who knows how to play a 200-foot game. Rick Tocchet really brought the best out of JT Miller. I think he motivated Quinn Hughes. And again, he got that whole defense playing, borderline elite, to be honest with you. So, yeah, really amazed at the job that Rick Tocchet done. And, again, there's been 3 Coach of the Year winners in Canucks history. For my money, Rick Tocchet did the best job of those 3. And it was, Pat Quinn in the 90s and Alain Vigneault in 06-07. But Rick Tocchet did it without really changing much on this team, right? Look at this team from last year. It was largely the same team aside from, adding some secondary pieces, and guys provided value like the Ian Cole, Teddy Blueger, Carson Soucy, but there were no major changes to the Canucks. This was Rick Tocchet coming in and making this team way better than they were with largely the same roster, or at least the same core.
Yeah, because it was a lot of question marks at the end of it because, like we mentioned, the Brock Besser sweepstakes, was that going to be a real thing? It turns out that basically got turned down. Now, I think the only subtraction was, of course, Bo Horvat. The fact of moving on from a player like that, but yet still keeping the amount of the core, but then bringing in some added new pieces that I felt like were locker room guys. These were guys that were very veteran experienced, that these were guys that were kind of keeping everybody level-headed. Because I'll be honest with you, I was very skeptical of this team when it came into the playoffs, because I was the kind of, you're getting red hot early. My question is, when you hit a cold spot, because that always worries me sometimes with teams. So, but I felt like they did the opposite. They got better up at it, but in the end, because the thing that questioned me, Thatcher Demko's injury. And so I was like, oh no, how are they going to figure this out? But then in the end, they proved me wrong. They actually were able to stay calm. They were able to stay poised, and they played the way Canucks hockey was meant to be played. So overcoming a lot of those adversities, and especially walking into potentially next season, because I think you and I both know how the Pacific right now has been shaped. It's offensively aggressive. It's another one that they are willing to go toe-to-toe, pound for pound on each end. But hopefully if Edmonton can figure out that goaltending situation. But it's like we kind of have a clear note what we're looking at when it comes to the competition in the Pacific, right?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, we'll see what next season brings. But you look at the Pacific, I'm not sure if Seattle, Calgary, Anaheim, and San Jose, if any of those teams are taking a massive leap. But to your point, it's Vancouver, LA, Vegas, and Edmonton. There's a lot of offensive skill. There's a lot of good defensive play. I think all those teams are, pretty good at playing defense, right? Rick Tocchet talked a lot last year about Vegas's defense and how he wanted to kind of model the Canucks defense to be more like Vegas. And look what the Canucks did. They brought in some sides with Ian Cole. They signed Carson Soucy. They trade for Nikita Zadorov. Like, this is a big, mean defense outside of, that top pairing of Hughes and Hronek. But even then, Philip Hronek, we made the joke early in the season, Kyle and I on Locked On Canucks, he might be the second best defenseman in Canucks history. It's been a sad state of affairs in Vancouver for way too long. But man, oh man, Philip Hronek did bring his own element, and yeah, he tailed off. But I think he's good at winning those board battles as well. But yeah, the Pacific is a crazy division, right? And yeah, it's really a top four, bottom four. And man, oh man, I got to say though, I was really hoping that the Vancouver Canucks drew the Vegas Golden Knights in round one. And I know most guys in Vancouver are saying, oh, you got to play Nashville. It's the easy opponent. But I'm all for fun, man. I'm all for stories. And Vegas and Vancouver would have been a ton of fun. But hey, maybe next year, man.
Yeah, and I've said it. I was just like, if I was the Golden Knights, and I quickly pointed that out. I was like, I'm not facing Dallas that first round, because knowing how they loaded defensively, they look at hyper aggressive scoring teams from Vegas to Colorado to even Vancouver, a lot of teams that knew how to score. As long as you've got guys that are sacrificing their bodies to stop the puck and help out the goaltending, that's where a lot of that, you're putting your foot on the gas pedal and it ain't going through. That's going to be a lot harder to even have to try to figure out every time with this position. So moving from Jacob Markstrom to Thatcher Demko, when you evaluate how he has managed his play, I mean, the guy's been playing with his hair on fire, and I feel like he's in the right spot where he could very much be something special as a netminder, because it's very rare when you get teams that figure that out. I mean, Vegas last year, Aiden Hill was playing out of his mind. And then you had, I love Connor Hellebuck, but this was a disaster this whole postseason. And then, I don't know, I'm kind of still questionable about, Georgie in the end. But when you look at Demko, there's got to be a lot of real good positive hopes and for what the Canucks can really build upon that.
I've been such a big believer of Thatcher Demko for a long time. Really from the moment he's been drafted, he did everything you would have wanted as a prospect, right? He won in the NCAA, great progression in the AHL. The guy's a psychology major which I think is big for a goalie. Like, we've seen some hot-headed goalies too. Like, credit to Jacob Markstrom, he was a great goalie, but early on in Vancouver, he always seemed to let in an early goal and then go like and get all angry, right? You want a guy who's calm, cool, and collected in net. And I think both Demko and Artur Shilovs, as well, as people are learning, are both those kind of guys. And not much rattles Demko. And man, oh man, I think his positioning is great. He makes some crazy saves in big moments. Look, for my money, he was obviously the second best goalie in the league this season. He's one of the best goalies on the planet. I don't think if Thatcher Demko is going to the playoffs and me being worried about like, oh, is he going to collapse? Like, obviously goalies have bad games, but you couldn't be more solid in net than you can with a guy like Thatcher Demko. One of the best goalies in the world. So, the Canucks, again, for a long time throughout Canucks history, I know our old general manager, Brian Burke, said about 20 years ago, like, oh, the Vancouver's a goalie graveyard. Like, our own GM said that, right? But really over the past, ever since Roberto Luongo came in the 2000s, it really hasn't been, right?
Yeah.
Look at Roberto Luongo, Corey Schneider, even during the bad years, like Miller and Lack played pretty well. Jacob Markstrom got a lot better. Thatcher Demko, he's just been unreal since he got here. And then Artur Shilovs, the 23-year-old Latvian, comes out of nowhere, and he was great for Vancouver in the postseason. Man, this guy's 23 going on 43. I think most people don't know this guy got married at 18 years old. So I think he's got maturity beyond his years, man. So yeah, just a couple calm, cool, collected guys in the net. And when, again, it's that old adage, defense wins championships, right? And when you got a great goaltending tandem, you got a great defense, and a lot to be said there about the Canucks, because a lot of free agents, a lot could change with the defense going into next season. But when you got that great defense and great goaltending, like the Dallas Stars have right now, as you mentioned, it's a recipe for success for sure.
Yeah, and and that's the one thing. Like, that's what makes it. That's what separates the good teams from the great teams. And we've had a lot of them. We've had a lot of really great teams that have caught on fire, and they basically went on a spectacular run. So, to building to this point, as we're in the conference championships right now, there's only one Canadian team left. Now, as somebody who represents for a Canadian team, 1993 was the last time that a championship was ever won in the region of Canada. It is so hard to really try to come up with the explanation of what has been happening with Canadian teams over the last 30 plus years. I've never found an answer for it. But I feel like because the competition's gotten better, I feel like many US teams that are out there, US like base teams, yes, they are getting a lot of foreign players. But even so, the connection, the camaraderie, everything, the chemistry just starts to come together. But it's like Montreal's just going through a whole dumpster fire. Same with Calgary. But then when you look at Edmonton, Vancouver, and I mean, what a disappointment for Winnipeg. I had them potentially be that competitive team, maybe not make to the final, but something competitive. But I mean, this has got to, at some point, this has got to get snapped at some point, right? Like, what, in your thoughts covering a Canadian team, what has been the missing link with this?
Yeah, this is a boring answer, but I do think it's partly luck based, right? Now you look, there's what, 7 Canadian teams now and 25 other teams in the NHL. So part of it's law of averages, right? There's been 31 years without a cup, but there's again, 32 teams that can win, right? So, and in that time too, like Vancouver's made the finals twice, Edmonton's been there, Calgary's been there, Montreal's been there, Ottawa's been there. Really, everyone except Toronto, Winnipeg has at least been to the finals, but they just haven't won. Now, there's the argument too that there's more pressure playing in the Canadian market, and I think there's something to be said about that, right? Like, for each one of the teams in Canada, like hockey, the NHL team is the number one attraction by far. Even in a city like Toronto, where you got like the Blue Jays and the Raptors, it's the Leafs for sure are the top ticket in town. So there's more pressure playing in the Canadian market, but I do think a lot of it is luck based, right? And there's just been some bad mismanagement among Canadian teams, right? Like Edmonton had a decade after they won the Cup final in 06 where Peter Chiarelli and Craig McTavish wrecked that team. The Canucks were ruined by Jim Benning. Pierre Dorion was a disaster in Ottawa. The Leafs were wrecked by, oh God, you can't remember who it was at the time. But anyways, I mean, it's just been a lot of bad mismanagement in Canada among general managers. And, it's, again, luck plays into it, but you got to have good management, right? It starts at the top. And if you have GMs trying to cut corners, making trades that are going to be detrimental to your team, I mean, in Vancouver, for instance, right? For fans that don't know, it's the Canucks tried to do this retool on the fly forever, and they were bad for a decade because of it. And it made no sense. Every fan of this market knew it didn't make sense. But lo and behold, the Canucks management just went and did what they wanted anyways, overpaid for all these fourth line guys. So again, that happened for the majority of Canadian teams at least once for a stretch over the past 30 years. So, I mean, the streak's got to break eventually. But I'll also say this, Jake. Sometimes Americans are like, oh, I'm sure Canadians just cheer for any other Canadian team to win the cup. That's not true in the slightest. I do not want Edmonton to win the Stanley Cup. I do not want to see the Canucks rival go lift the Stanley Cup. I'm cheering for probably everybody else except the Edmonton Oilers to win. F that. I mean, yeah. Connor McDavid winning for the league. I'm sure that would be good, right? The best player to win the title. I don't want to see it, okay? I tell all my Edmonton friends, all my Oilers fans, I hate your team and I hope you lose.
I'll tell you one thing, man. I mean, you may not be. I mean, I thought Calgary was the only fire brewing when it came to the Battle of Alberta. And apparently now, like, we got Canucks fans that are feeling the same way. So it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah. Eventually, this will be the moment for at least for the region of Canada to at least have a championship. But hopefully, we'll see. I mean, anyone that's worthy of putting together that right group, that right squad, and when you got the right people in the right places, then that's when everything else flourishes. So a side note before letting you go. So now we got hockey in Utah. And I was kind of looking at like, why haven't we had hockey in Utah sooner? Now, nothing to take away from the desert of Arizona. I used to love watching they were the very first of hockey in the desert. They experimented in that. Now, I felt bad for Arizona fans because, first of all, why am I playing in a collegiate arena where it's like these players just feel like they're playing college hockey every night? And look, living in Denver, I've got cold weather. I've got beautiful weather. It's maintainable, especially when you look at the ice. So when I look at Utah, because I camped there multiple times, the weather's great. You get snowstorms in the end, but it's maintainable and manageable. And from what I've been told, the Jazz owners are so like invested when it comes to the teams. So now having this team in Utah, how do you really see this play out? And could this potentially work in this market?
I think it could work because we talked about it a bit, but it starts with good management, right? And like you said, I think Ryan Smith, the Utah Jazz owner, now the Utah Hockey Club owner, the Utah Sasquatches or whatever the hell they're going to call him. I think there's a chance for success there, right? Because it sounds like Ryan Smith has invested a lot into the Jazz. He's been a very progressive owner. I know it hasn't really helped the Jazz into a ton of success, but it sounds like, again, from everything you hear from Utah and reporters in that market, that he's done everything possible to put that team in the right direction. That never happened in Arizona for the 25 or 30 years that they were in the desert. It seemed to get worse and worse with every owner that was in charge, and ending with the fiasco of Gutierrez there. So, I mean, you got to have good ownership in charge at the end of the day. I mean, again, I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about the Utah market. I would love to visit Utah, man. Go give me your Utah travel tips after this. I'm a big road trip guy. I just went on a road trip. I just went down on a road trip to the States actually with my family earlier this month. So anyways, man, love to get down to Utah, but it's an interesting market just based on the demographics there, and even reporters have talked about it, like the amount of fundamentalists and Mormons there. It's a very different market from everything else in the States, but we've seen in Utah it can work, and Utah seems like a beautiful city. They love their snow, they love their outdoor sports. I think if you have good ownership in place, and again, what the NHL has done a good job of, and not that anyone really wants to give Gary Bettman credit, is what he's done with the expansion drafts and valuations. It seems like every team can be competitive in the NHL, and the NHL has pushed parity for a long time. And I know Utah's inheriting an Arizona team that hasn't been very good, but they got one of the best prospect pools in the league. There's a chance this team can make some noise. They made some noise in the first half of last season before everything fell apart. But hey, like you said, they're playing in a 5,000 seat arena. I like to see what that team can do in a full stadium with New Jersey and a fresh start. Like I think hockey can work in Utah, but we'll see how it goes. They are in the Canucks. Actually, no, they moved out of the Canucks division. But I'll be rooting for Utah unless the Canucks team in the playoffs. How about that?
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I'll tell you what, though, hopefully I won't get this narrative that if we got a team in Utah, that they're basically be like, they're manipulating the LTIR. I'm like, come on, stop it. So was 16 other teams that have basically done the same thing. Do better. Do better. But yeah, I mean, my experiences being in Utah, I've been to Cedar City, I've been to St. George. Camping wise, I've been to Duck Creek, I've been to Panguitch. It's a lot of outdoor, there's nothing you can't do outdoors, from the camping to the fishing to the hunting. I do all of it. And having a piece of land, at least in the place where, hey, if I end up getting a cabin, I'm Airbnb-ing that thing. And I'll end up, visiting 7-8 times a year. And then at that point, I'm getting my money's worth. That's going to come back to my mortgage and make it well worth it. Such a travel destination. And they've got good food too. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of real good restaurant recommendations up over there, man. It's a great visit. You'll love it from there. Trevor, appreciate you for taking the time coming up on here talking the Canucks. Where can people find you and getting locked on those Vancouver Canucks?
It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Jake the Snake. Let's go, buddy. You can find me on Twitter at Trev Beggs. You can also find Locked On Canucks wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. I guess I also go to Instagram as well at Trev Beggsy, but I would say, first and foremost, I get paid if you go subscribe to the podcast, listen to Locked On Canucks. Again, it's the off season, but we're having fun every damn day. Again, man, just trying to make some magic happen, much like you are here on this show. Thanks for having me, bud.
Absolutely, man. Take care of yourself. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, man. And we'll see you up on the other side and see what the Canucks do this off season. Take care, my man.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had such a soft spot for